Welcome back to Cheddar's Closing Bell, everyone. U.S. sprinter Sha'Carri Richardson suspended from the Olympic team on June 28th after testing positive for THC, a chemical found in marijuana. And while the one-month suspension ends in time for Richardson to appear at the Olympic Games, she was ultimately left off the U.S. roster entirely earlier this week. Well, former NFL Pro Bowl running back and 1998 Heisman Trophy winner Ricky Williams sitting down with Cheddar's Chloe Aiello to provide his perspective on the story.
I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed. And I think that in 2021, for sure, the rules are way too harsh. You know, for me, when I heard the news about the failed drug test, I had a little PTSD. Just going back to 2004 when it broke in the news that my retirement was attached to a failed drug test, and just all the negative media and all the negative comments and just all the negativity. And so when I saw that in the news, I really felt for her, and I posted it in Twitter, and my response was like, damn, this is still happening. This is still happening 17 years later. But I think when things like this happen, they give us the opportunity to have these conversations, and these conversations lead to change. The change the NFL finally made this past year took over 15 years, but I think my story and my trajectory after my suspension, I think, has really shown that cannabis is not as bad as we've been shown, and quite the opposite, that it actually helps a lot of people.
Sure. And, President Joe Biden even weighed in on this discussion, suggesting that he was proud of Richardson's response to all this. And as you know, she apologized. She took responsibility for using. How do you think she should have responded to this?
I think she should have apologized for disappointing people, but definitely I don't think we should ever apologize for making choices that we feel are best for us. And I think that one of the big issues that this brings up is sometimes our outer goals and what we are trying to accomplish in the world comes into conflict with what's going on the inside. And I think also with Naomi Osaka, it's not the same conversation, but it's a similar conversation about mental health, which for me, it means taking care of our inner life. And so I think for a professional athlete to come out and for us to have these conversations, not just about cannabis is a tool, but about mental health and the choices that we have to make to take care of ourselves, I think it's extremely important.
You referenced your own career, and, as you mentioned, this discussion is still going on. Athletes testing positive for cannabis and getting sometimes very harshly punished for it is nothing new. But in this particular instance, there does seem to be a really intense backlash to her suspension. Could this be what it takes to move the needle on cannabis in sports finally?
It's awesome. I flashed back to 2004, long time ago, when I was going through something similar. And even the NFL Players Association, who is an organization that's built to support the players, were mum, were silent, didn't stand up for me. And now to see people from all walks of life standing up and making a statement, I think this is a great example of how things get changed.
You mentioned the NFL a couple of times, and we now know that players who test positive for THC are fined instead of suspended. And the league is even funding research on cannabinoids as an alternative treatment for pain. Why do you think the NFL has actually eased up on its rules?
I think the main reason is the players. The players finally started speaking up, and the Players Association, who abandoned me back in the day, I had a conversation with DeMaurice Smith a couple of years ago. And he said, the NFL, the way the players are approaching cannabis, it's not a substance of abuse issue. It's a wellness issue. And I think when the players taking the lead and changing the conversation has really made a huge difference. And I think what we see in the larger population is that people are starting to be honest about their cannabis use, and they're starting to share their positive stories. And I think that's changing the whole narrative.
What do you think would have to happen to actually get to the point where cannabis use is normalized among athletes and more akin to either alcohol consumption or even medication? Do you actually envision that happening at some point?
Of course. And that's why I'm starting my own brand called the Highsmith brand. And it's really about creating an avenue that brings sports and cannabis together. And it's rooted in my own personal experience. I think especially as football players and I think men in general, we're taught to be tough and to shut off our awareness of what's going on the inside and just go out and fight. And I found for me, cannabis really helped me reflect on my inner world and helped me bring more balance. And in the long term, helped me become a better athlete. And I think the conversation around Sha'Carri Richardson should be quite different. I think we're looking at a young talent, a world-class sprinter who makes the conscious choice to use cannabis to take care of herself. Okay. And this is someone who's a champion, right? And so instead of talking about cannabis in this negative sense, I think where we see, professional high level athletes consuming cannabis and still performing well, I think we have to start to think about that a little bit more.
Now, you mentioned your new brand called Highsmith. Can you tell us a little bit about your company, Real Wellness, and when Highsmith could become available to consumers?
Yeah, so we're launching in August, so we're getting really close. And the whole idea is it's a brand. And the idea, like I said, using my story to tell even more compelling stories about how people can bring cannabis into their lives and help them achieve not only on the athletic field, but achieve in all areas of their life. And no one's really been talking about cannabis like this. So I'm really excited to bring a brand forward that allows people who get it to have something to grab onto, and we can keep growing together in this.
And a major thanks there to Ricky Williams. He's the former NFL Pro Bowler and Heisman Trophy winner.